Hey gang, this week we're continuing our series about this or that. This or that is where we are taking a look at comparison, about those times in our lives where we hold up the things in our life that look like this against things in other people's life that look like that. And when we do that, we compare the two, and sometimes it can leave us feeling frustrated. It can leave us feeling anxious or disappointed when our lives don't look like that and we're stuck with this. Those things can cause all these different feelings, and sometimes today we're going to be talking about one of those feelings that comparison can cause in our own lives, and that's jealousy. When we're jealous about something, jealousy is a very specific type of comparison. It's a comparison about how we feel when we want what other people have. When we've got this and we look at that and we hold those up and think, if I could just trade this for that, I'd take it in a heartbeat. And what happens when we have those feelings, when we look at those things, whether it's your new friend or your friend's new shoes, whether it's one of your friends who's more popular than you and you just wish you were as cool or as funny or whatever as they are so that you could be popular too. Or maybe it's your sibling, you feel like they get more attention from your parents than you do. Whatever it is, jealousy, there's a couple of issues with jealousy, and it's one, that jealousy can come from anywhere. It's not just about friends or siblings. Jealousy can happen just walking down the halls of your school or looking out your window. Jealousy can come from almost anywhere, and the other problem with jealousy is that the amount of damage that it can do in our lives without us even knowing that the damage is occurring. See, within us, jealousy can cause all sorts of things. It can cause some insecurity where we feel like we're not good enough, where we don't feel like we measure up because of the jealousy that we feel for those around us. Jealousy can make us unhappy. It can make us just unhappy with who we are, with our lives, the things that we are, the things that we have. And jealousy can really end up making us angry. Angry that our lives don't look like everybody else's. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but jealousy and comparison really just get in this really vicious cycle where you've got this and want that, and when you finally get that, you want this. And when you get this, you want that. And when you got that, you want this. And it just keeps on going, and you're never satisfied when all you do is compare and get jealous of those around you. It's that vicious cycle that's hard to get out of. But another problem with jealousy is that it doesn't just damage the inside of us. It's not just about what happens in our heart, with our emotions, with our thoughts. It's also in the relationships with people around us that jealousy can really begin to destroy. It can come out in all sorts of different ways, but it might look like avoiding somebody, that you see what they've got and you wish you had it, and so you just kind of push them aside and don't spend as much time with them as you used to. Maybe it looks like you gossiping about them, that you're talking about them behind their backs with your friends, making fun of them, telling stories that may or may not even be true. And really, jealousy in relationships kind of ends up with us being unable to be happy for those around us. The good news about jealousy is that you and I, we're not the first ones to deal with jealousy. Jealousy's been around for centuries. As long as people have been able to think, we've been able to be jealous. And so with that in mind, the story from the Bible we're going to look at today comes from one of those stories about David. You're probably most familiar with David and Goliath, where David begins his story as a shepherd. He fights this giant and defeats him, becomes this big hero in the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines. And it only sort of gets better for David from there, but it also kind of gets worse. What ends up happening is that David moves from shepherd to hero and eventually king. But for David to get to king, he's got to get past the other king. And this other king that was in charge of Israel at the time of the David and Goliath story is a guy named Saul. Now, Saul started out a great king. God had anointed him and picked Saul to be the king, but then Saul started thinking that maybe he knew better than everybody else, including God and God's prophet. And so Saul begins to do his own thing, and begins to lead Israel the wrong direction. And so God says, I'm done with Saul. David's going to be our next king. And through a couple of different battles, through a couple of different things, David begins to get more popular with the Israelite people. And it gets so bad that at one point, after this big battle, Saul and David are on their way back into the city, and Saul begins to hear all these chants and songs and gets really excited about the things that the Israelites are singing and talking about. But this is his reaction when he finds out what the song is actually about. This made Saul very angry. "What's this?" he said. "They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king." So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The people weren't saying that Saul had failed them. The people weren't saying that they didn't like Saul. All they were saying was that in this battle, in this particular instance, David had done more. And what Saul being a good leader should have been like, "Well, yeah, he's my buddy. David's my guy. Of course, we're doing great things together." But Saul instead gets jealous. And he lets that jealousy of David eat away at him. It begins to ruin Saul's life. Really, Saul's life stops being focused on being a good king, and it begins to be about keeping his power and about killing David. There's going to be multiple instances after this story that Saul is always after David because he's scared of him, because he's jealous of him, because he's worried about who David might be. He begins to be jealous. This jealousy contorts the inside of Saul. It consumes Saul. His jealousy of David consumes him, and that begins to be all he's worried about. This jealousy that we see in this story about Saul has the power to change who we are. It changes the view of who we are. It changes about the view about what we have. It changes the view about our relationship with other people. And it kills our ability to be able to celebrate the good in other people. What Saul should have been doing was celebrating David. Yeah, David's a great leader in this military battle. But his jealousy eats away and it kills his ability to celebrate David. When we stop comparing ourselves, we can better celebrate others and ourselves. Another way to put this comes to us out of the book of Proverbs, and it says this: "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." What the author of that proverb says is that jealousy begins deep down within us, down to our bones, at the very innermost part of our being. Jealousy begins to rot away from the inside out. Saul's life is a wonderful example of how jealousy destroys from the inside. But David's life, on the other hand, does a great job of helping us to see what a heart at peace looks like. David's focus was almost constantly on what God wanted from him and what God wanted from his people. David kept his eyes focused on how God was at work within himself and in others, and it helped him to stay at peace. Because when we stop comparing, we can better celebrate others and ourselves. So what does that mean in our lives? When jealousy rears its head in our lives, how do we deal with it? One thing I think we can do is that when it comes to combating jealousy, it starts with you. What do you have in your life right now that you can celebrate? Now, I know some of you might be thinking, "Oh, my life's terrible. I've got nothing to celebrate." I think you might be selling yourself short a little bit. I guarantee you there is something in your life right now that's worth celebrating. Whether it's a relationship in your life, whether it's a sibling, a parent, a friend, a small group leader, somebody in your life is important to you. And that's something that we should celebrate. Maybe you've got a talent, a hobby, a gift, something that you enjoy doing. That's something to celebrate. And if you can't come up with any of those right now, I've got something that you can celebrate. God's deep love for you that doesn't really matter on who you are, what you look like, what you do. God loves you regardless, and that's something that we can all celebrate. Find something in your life to celebrate right now, and that's one thing that we can do to fight off jealousy. But the other thing we can do is to celebrate someone else. And I'm not talking about celebrating somebody that you're friends with. I'm not talking about celebrating somebody that you just get along with all the time. I want you to do something even more challenging. I want you to celebrate the very person that you're jealous of right now. Whoever it is in your life that you look at and you go, man, I wish I looked like this. I wish I was as good at dance or band or soccer or whatever it is. Whoever it is that you are jealous of right now, I want you to celebrate them. The things that they have, the things that they're good at, the things that you wish you had, celebrate for them in their lives those things that they have. That's difficult. I know how weird that sounds. But what I can promise you is that if we do those things, if we celebrate people instead of being jealous for them, peace will begin to build up in our lives and we'll start feeling a lot better about who we are, what we have, and just who we are in God's love. So, in those people's lives, what I want you to do is to congratulate them. I want you to compliment them. I want you to talk well about them behind their backs. And if you can't do any of those things, the very least I want you to do this week is to pray for them. Because if we learn how to celebrate people, our lives are going to start to look a lot better. The things that we have, who we are, it's going to be easier to be with ourselves when we get that peace that we talked about out of that proverb. The peace of heart that comes when we stop comparing ourselves and we're better able to celebrate others and ourselves. So this week, the question I want to leave you with is this. What's one thing or person I can celebrate? And we'll see you guys next week.